and welcome to the Tennessee Golden Hour podcast. My name is Matt Tullis.
And I'm Beth Moore.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, Matt. How are you?
I'm trying to act as young as possible
because
we've got a young guest.
We do.
I think he's even younger than you are.
He actually is quite a bit, so.
And I'm like twice his age. I mean, yes.
You're older than I thought, Matt.
I probably am. I don't know.
32, yeah.
32. So almost.
Yeah.
Almost there.
I'd be thinking about retirement if I was twice his age, but I'm very close.
You're getting there.
But I'm going to let you do the formal introduction.
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
We're so excited to have Ryan Keaton, who is the Emerging Generation Specialist for the Tennessee Baptist Mission Board. How are you, Ryan?
Good. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you here because we know young adults. We've seen them from afar. Some of us have had contact with them.
That's right.
Okay.
You have a few.
I have 4.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to understand this. So this may turn into a therapy session for Matt Tullis as my children move on into adulthood. And so I want to just start out with the great time machine. And I want you to take us to year 2040. And we're going to put this in a time capsule. And then you'll be almost to the middle of your career at that point. I'll be dead at that point,
Hopefully
probably.
not.
Yeah, I hope not.
You'll be retired on the beach somewhere.
I'll be like doing the yarn thing, kind of knitting or something. Yeah. It'll be great. But what do you think this whole culture and church and all those things in 2040, just your best guess, when you look at this new generation coming up, what do you think that's going to be like?
Yeah, I think the church in 2040 is going to look similar but different. So I think it's going to be smaller numerically, but deeper convictionally. This generation, millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, Polars, whatever you want to call them, they aren't going to just be a part of it to be a part of it, like so many are in the church today.
Right.
Well, why are you a church member? Well, my parents went to church here. My grandparents went to church here. That's not going to be the reality of a lot of churchgoers in 2040. And so if they're there, they're going to be there because they have a relationship with Jesus and they're looking to win the world with the gospel. And so it may be smaller numerically, hopefully not. Hopefully, between now and then we do a lot of work. But if we're just going by projections, the numbers may be smaller, but the ones who are there are going to be there with conviction and they're going to be there ready to go. They're not going to just be Christians by name only, because that won't be a thing in our culture by then.
Well, you just mentioned several different names of the generations.
Yeah.
I feel like for a long time, we just were really only hearing about millennials.
Sure.
And then we've heard a lot about Gen Z, but you mentioned a couple others. Can you explain those to us?
Yeah, so, the Gen Z, depending on who you talk to, that either starts in 95, 97, or 2000. Barna normally pushes it more toward the 2000 mark, but they're from that range, so the mid to late 90s through about 2012 would be your Gen Zers.
When they were born.
When they were born. And so your youngest ones at the time of this recording would be anywhere from 12 to 25, 26, which is pretty typical when it comes to demographic generation breakdowns. Usually about every 10 years or so, there will be a new one. And then Gen Alpha are also known as Polars. And most people are saying 2013 to 15 through question mark, right? We don't know when that is going to stop. Whatever next great tragedy or event happens, that marks kind of the bookend there.
Why do they call them Polars? Do you know?
I'm not quite sure. You'll have to. Yeah, that's right. You'll have to check out Jean Twenge, her book Generations. She really uses those breakdowns, and she's
we'll
the
have
one.
That in the comments link.
Yeah, you'll have to find that there. But she's the one who really calls them Polars. Barna would call them Gen Alpha. And that's really just starting at Gen Z. Where do you go after at the alphabet? They just went back to A. And so, but yeah, and so they would be, anywhere from, 11 to being born right now.
Why do you think there is a decline among young adults coming to traditional churches?
I think there's several factors. One is probably they are the first generation that was truly not raised in church. Their parents weren't raised in church. Gen Xers. That was kind of the first generation where church became, to some degree, a lot more optional in raising. You didn't see as many Gen Xers raised in church, and so they didn't raise their millennial children in church. And so to one degree, it's just not a cultural thing anymore. Even being in the buckle of the Bible Belt, I think the statistic right now is 70% of Tennessee won't attend church on any given Sunday. And so when you have 70% of the population, even right here in the Bible Belt, so a lot of them aren't being raised in church. I think a second reason is there's just a continual rising distrust in organizations and organized anything, and religion is falling into that. And so whether it be the government or whatever, and that may be why they're called polars, just because there's a lot of polarizing things happening. We've gone from a communal society where boomers and elders and even some of your Gen X, they were really raised as, hey, we got to think about a broader community, and church falls into that, right? So you go to your job, you go to your church, and we're just all about this. But then really in your Gen Xers, millennials, they became a whole lot more individualistic. And I think that's where we're seeing the rise of, I can be a Christian, but I don't have to be a part of that church. And so as you think about the individual, one of the challenges is, churches have to continually show these younger adults the need to be in a body of believers. You may try to do everything else alone. You can work from home, you can have entertainment from home, but really to be the bride of Christ, we have to be in community with other believers. And so just seeing that need of being in community where in every other aspect of their life, they're thinking about themselves as an individual, just a mind shift. It's a different worldview.
So then how do we engage these generations and help them to see the value of the body?
I think showing them what we're about and what we're for, because I think, at least in the conversations that I have with a lot of young adults, they view Christians as what we're against.
Yeah.
So they could name our top hot button topics of, you're a believer, or, you're a Baptist, so you must have this opinion. And most of the time it's our negative view on something or what we think is wrong. But the reality is a lot of young adults rally around a lot of things that we as believers rally around, and taking care of the orphans and the widows and being good stewards of the earth, and all of these things as believers, those are biblical concepts. They were biblical concepts before they were ever political concepts. And so just showing like we have the same desires that you have, and this is how our church is feeding the hungry or clothing those who are naked or taking care of life from conception to death. And we have ministries already ready for that. The Golden Offering, we have money going towards that, and just showing, hey, we're about this same effort that you care about. And this is how you can do it, being a part of us.
So I think it'd be great for us, since you are fairly new. You've been at the Tennessee Baptist Mission Board how long?
3 years tomorrow at this recording.
3 years tomorrow, and you
right.
really spent your first year kind of getting your feet wet and all this stuff, and
first 3
developing
years,
a vision. And so some of our people don't even know Ryan Keaton, and he is just a shining star at the TBMB. So I wanted to ask you, kind of give us your story.
I did grow up in your traditional nuclear family with mom and dad both home believers, raised me in church. My dad was a deacon, and my mom was and is a church secretary. She just celebrated her 25th year as church secretary at my home church. And so that definitely laid the foundation for the life and service that I have today, because I really to some degree don't know any different, right? And so I don't understand the concept of showing up to a church event, consuming and leaving. That's never been my life. I've always gotten there early and sat up and tore down and cleaned up afterwards. And so that's really all I know when it comes to church life is serving and participating and not consuming. And so that really is poured into my leadership now and my ministry now, and I've thankfully continued that, and hopefully we'll be able to continue that with my daughter Evelyn. And so me and my wife Rebecca are excited about that. But so I was raised in church. I was saved at a young age through RAs, World Ambassadors. I was saved through that ministry on a Wednesday night. Started asking questions as an elementary school kid, and believe that even at the young age, though I couldn't fully understand what all that meant, I feel like I knew enough to be able to give my life to Jesus. Then in high school, at a World Changers Mission Project, I surrendered the call to ministry, to vocational ministry. And so that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
So CP has played a big role in your life.
It has, yeah, through role ambassadors. NAM was in charge of World Changers whenever I surrendered to ministry.
That.
So NAM there went to Baptist universities, and so my life, I'm a testament of believers all around the United States given through the cooperative program. And supporting those causes. I'm a product of that for sure.
I love that. And not only are you on staff here at TBMB, but you serve pretty faithfully in your local church. You try to not be on the road, I guess, as much.
Yeah.
And be active there.
Yeah. So that was, and that's just a testament to my home church now, First Baptist Lexington, and my pastor, Clay Hallmark. Whenever I made the transition, we had that conversation of, would there still be a place here for me? And I know that it is a little bit of a tension, right, of being on staff at a church, and then no longer having a staff position, but still being a church member with leadership. And so we just communicated that from the very start to our church members. And First Lexington has been very generous and gracious of letting me and my family stay. And so me and my wife still teach Sunday school. So I try to block off at least half of the Sundays when possible to be there. And so we have great young adults who fill in my absence whenever I can't be there. But we teach kind of the post-college to 29 Sunday school class on Sunday mornings. And then on Wednesday nights, we have our young adult Bible study that meets at 7:30 after everything. And so that's kind of your 18 to 30 Bible study. And we help lead that as well. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So still got local involvement.
And so a year ago, Evelyn came into your life.
That's right.
Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, you hear that a baby changes everything, and they really do. And there's no way until you have one that you can fully understand or comprehend. And so, our life has been much better. It's been caffeine induced and prayer filled, but no, it's been great. And so, it's changed a lot. It's changed, like professionally. Like I try to be really strategic with my calendar on saying no, which I'm terrible at. I want to make things work, but just really trying to be there for her. And but it's been awesome.
I think a lot of our people who are their kids they're empty nesters, and they forget what it's like to be a young parent. What are some things now that are magnified about how a church hosts a young family?
It's just a different world, and even like comments or things like that. Just And I don't know, this could be the millennial in me or whatever it may be, the young adult, but it just seems like the expectations or the pressures now versus maybe a couple of years ago are just different on parents. Like I hear stories from my parents or grandparents about things that happened when they were kids or raising kids, and I'm like, my peers would go to jail if that happened today. So it's just like, so I feel like to some degree, like, not me personally, but maybe my peers get scrutinized on like the helicopter parents that we are. But it's like in the crazy world that we live in, where like one video or one thing, like there's just a lot of pressure There's just a lot of pressure to do those things. And so to say that in the church life, like, we come in with a lot of stuff, right? We move half our house every time we go anywhere with the sound machine and the car seat and all of those things. And so, there's looks occasionally, and there's comments, and people are kind and they don't mean ill will of it, but that just happens, right? And so I'm sure I'm not the only young adult that gets those type of things like, well, back in my day, we didn't do it this way or whatever it may be. As far as hosting outsiders, I mean, one thing, it's just having clean facilities for children. Because I mean, I know that if a church doesn't always have babies, that area and space becomes like a storage closet sometimes. Right. And so we have experienced that, and it just is what it is. But I know for like, if I was wanting to make that church my church home, that's just that's very telling to me, right? Of like, you weren't expecting me to come. Right. And so would there be a place for me if I was trying to be here full time? Just things for churches to think through, even if you don't have it right now. If you're not preparing for it,
that's right.
When somebody does come, they're not going to feel like there's really a place for them long term there.
Ryan, I've heard you we've talked before, churches often reach out to you and say, okay, we're ready to start a young adult ministry. Like, what do we need to do? Yeah. And you often give some advice about that. What do you say to churches that say we're ready to start?
Yeah, I would say, just being very honest with yourself about where you're at. Most of the time, well, I don't want to overgeneralize, but many times when a church calls, they're looking around, and to kind of some of your comments, Matt, like everybody looks like them. Okay, we're 50 and above, white hair. We don't have any young adults. We need to start a young adult ministry.
Right.
And it's like, really, your issue is deeper than that. Like, how many 50-year-olds are you reaching with the gospel? Chances are it's not that you don't have young adults. It's you're not being evangelistic. And so I try to encourage churches, before you start thinking about a program, think about a person. So before you ever start to try to create a young adult ministry, what type of gospel relationships are you having with young adults that are believers or non-believers? Because really, I mean, the Field a Dream model of if we build it, they will come, that's not a thing. I mean, so you can have a great space, you can have...
They haven't even seen the movie.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. They don't even know
that's a dated reference. But yeah, you can have all of the things, but if you don't have young adults for it, they're not just going to come because you quote unquote have it. Right. So I would say the first thing before you ever try to think of a program or a Bible study or anything is just try to start intersecting your life with young adults. And that may seem intimidating or whatever, but most churches have grandchildren or children who fall into that age range. And sadly, a lot of them are disconnected from the church. Start in your own homes or start with your neighbors of just having gospel relationships. And it may not immediately lead to church membership at the start, but that's a good place to start before thinking, hey, we need to create this program or ministry. Think about the person. Who am I trying to reach? Which kind of falls into the definition, like, what is a young adult? Some churches, like I've walked to some churches and like, oh, you're here. You can sit on our young married class, and it's like, you all are my parents' age or older. Like, so this is your young married class. Like the youngest person in here is...
I'm in a college and career class.
Yeah. And so just like correctly defining your classes.
Right. Yes.
Of like, what is an actual young adult? And so...
One of the things that we heard this morning in our staff meetings, we've got 400 pastorless churches. And so that means that there are going to be a lot of young pastors that we're praying in. You're closer to that and have been through that as being a youth pastor at your church. What can churches do to really help nurture and grow their young ministers?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would say... the value of mentorship is huge. And so don't just leave your pastor, especially if it's a pastor, just to feel like they have to do it alone. Like, even though you may just be a church member, if you have a younger pastor, like, you have life experience that they can learn from. And so even though they're your spiritual leader, you can still be a life mentor to them. Like, they need that mentorship. But then also, like, I would say provide guardrails, but freedom. So, I mean, obviously, you shouldn't let them just do whatever they want at the detriment of your church. But the reality is they're going to have a different worldview and a different view of values and culture than probably your older congregation does. Not that it's not biblical, but the way that they approach that is going to be probably quite different than you're used to it being approached by. So just giving them the freedom to work within their personality. And not just say, well, we've always done it this way and this is how you have to do it. Because again, in the younger generations and that individual model, they want their life and their personality to shine through in their ministry. And if you just put them in a box of, well, this is what our pastor has always looked like and it's always done, and this is what you're going to have to do, you don't give them the chance to be who God has called them to be in that position. And so I would say provide good mentors around them. And if it's not in your church, find some pastor in a church close by who could take them under their wing, to pour into them, to just be that mentor, and then give them the freedom to lead.
I want to turn this question around to the guy or gal who feels the Lord calling them into ministry. How do I need to prepare for being in ministry?
Just put your yes on the table. And so don't spend so much time waiting for some future calling that you're not faithful today. So like, if you feel like God is calling you to be a missionary in a third world country, well, start having relationships with ethnic people today in your hometown. That's what I try to encourage my young adults all the time. Like, that's great. You want to go overseas and serve through IMB, that's great. What type of relationships are you having today that helps you build toward that? And so if you want to be a pastor or a church leader, start today. You may not be preaching every Sunday or whatever, but find somewhere in your church that you can start serving. If you're not willing to serve now and prepare now, how can you expect God to trust you with that down the road?
That's a great word.
And then ask good questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I know that at First Lexington, whenever I was on staff there, we hired the middle school guy that we hired primarily because I had been in contact with him before, and I loved his just teachable spirit. He constantly would ask great questions. He didn't assume that he always knew the answer, or if he did know the answer, he didn't always assume that was the right answer. And I just loved that spirit about him. So I was like, when we were looking for somebody, I was like, he is our guy, just because he may not have it all figured out now, but he's not arrogant in thinking he has to. And I think there's a lot of pressure, especially with I felt that pressure, like when you first step in, that you're expected to know it all, and you're not. And it's okay to just ask those questions, because you can save yourself a lot of pitfalls and a lot of heartache if you just ask questions that you may not know.
Yeah. So tell us some things that you are excited about that are happening right now with your ministry here at TBMB.
Yeah, I'm excited that it seems today, versus when I first started 3 years ago, that there is a growing interest in reaching young adults with the gospel. I think, I'm not saying it's directly things that I'm doing, but it just seems churches are seeing that young adults are staying in Tennessee and moving to Tennessee. And whether we have a strategy or not, there's at least a recognition that we got to do something about this. So that's encouraging to me, that churches are seeing the need to reach the next generation with the gospel. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm excited that there are a lot of great BCM college ministries that are sending out college students to serve. In my local context, I'm super excited about the young adults in my group because they're just engaged. Like everything that I hear churches attribute to young adults is not my experience with young adults, which again, leads me to just say, you can see a person online or in the news and get a caricature of them. But when you sit across the table from them, you may get a completely different picture. Like young adults today, and I mentioned it earlier, but the ones who are bought in, man, they are bought in. Right. You don't have to convince them to read their Bible. You don't have to convince them to show up to services. You don't have to convince them to serve. They're looking for those opportunities. And so that's just been really exciting for me. We have a great group of people who are they're killing it right now. And it makes my job a lot easier because I really don't have to do a whole lot. I just have to open the door and let them run, and they're running with it. And so
that's awesome.
Yeah, we don't need to be sitting around wringing our hands about the future, because I think it's in good hands, my experience with young adults.
For sure. Yeah. And again, you're going to have extremes, but again, they're either all in or all out, and that's easier for me to work with. Yeah. Because if you look like a Christian on the outside and you know the answers to say on Sundays and Wednesdays, but then the rest of your life you're living for the world, that's impossible for me as a church leader to figure out how to disciple you.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like hitting a moving target. But if you're all out, I know you're out, and I know what starting point that I'm at, and I know how to kind of share the gospel with you and try to we at least know a starting place. Right. But when that starting place is a constant moving target of you look like the church and the world, and you're probably not a part of either, that's just a whole lot harder, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about resources, and I really want you to tell our audience about the YA podcast first, and then share some other resources that you've read, things that have impacted your ministry, which are related to young adult ministry.
Yeah. So
what is the podcast about, and what?
Yeah, so please check out our podcast. It's Young Adults TN. So the YA podcast, Young Adults TN, on all podcast platforms, YouTube. And so we have about 20 or so episodes on there right now. The whole first season is off of our book that we wrote back in April of 2023, Winning Young Adults in Our Harvest Field. And so we got 7 young adult pastors from across the state to write on different focuses.
Okay.
And we interviewed them the first season.
And so where can they get a copy of that?
So if you go to tnbaptist.org and just click on the young adult ministry or search young adult ministry in the tab, we have a young adult page. And on that page, there's links to our social media. There's links to that, to the ebook. There's links to our podcast. And then if you contact me through that, we can get you a physical copy of that book.
That's great.
But yeah, and so it's real. I hope the book is real practical because practitioners wrote it about the different areas and what they're seeing. And so that's what the whole first season is about. The second season is just, again, people who are in the young adult realm, and it's a wider array of topics, but all about just how people are seeing young adults be reached with the gospel. And so yeah.
And we have your co-host here.
That's right.
He's actually off camera here, Lorenzo. I
Baylor.
love Lorenzo Baylor, and
he carries the podcast.
He
Honestly.
does.
He's way cooler than
That's right. He is
very cool. And so finally, one of the great things about the cooperative program is that we got people like Ryan, who's here and is here to help. So how can you help our churches?
Yeah, so I get the great task of coming alongside of churches and helping them reach, engage, mobilize young adults. And it's really as broad as that. I don't have like a cookie cutter thing that I go into, but really however I can help encourage or support or coach an individual church, I'm willing to do that. So really however they need, if you need resources or if you need strategy or if you need a demographic survey, whatever we can offer, we can come in and do. But I normally try to make it as individual as the church needs it, because different churches have different needs. So if you have a need about young adults, please reach out. Yeah, I'd love to help you with that.
Ryan, thanks so much for joining us. One of my favorite coworkers. I love when I get to catch up with you.
Thanks so much, Archie.
For your
thanks
sweet
for
wife,
having me.
So.